Welcome back, everybody. This is Modern Randy. I am Randy, and today we're talking about the standard meta breakdown of the last weekend with the challenges, what's going on, what's winning, what's doing well. As always, guys, if you like what I'm doing, you like what you're seeing, go ahead and leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know what you guys are playing in the standard and what you think is going to be the best deck to take to your RCQs. So, going into this, starting off with the Friday challenge here, we have the breakdown of 9 Teamr mid-range, 6 mono red, 5 Gruul Prowess, 3 Golgari mid-range, 2 Caretakers Control, haven't seen that deck in a minute, and then a bunch of different one-ofs. So no surprise here, Teamr mid-range seems to be still the most popular deck moving forward, along with the aggro decks. The biggest surprise here is 2 Caretakers Control showing up at all. We haven't seen the deck really show up or do anything in the past little bit. It is kind of interesting to see it start getting some more traction. Maybe there is something there with that deck. I hope so. I really like Caretaker's talent as a card myself, but to no one's surprise, Teamr mid-range did win this challenge. Pretty much, I won't say a stocked list because this deck still has yet to have a stocked list in my opinion. We keep seeing the sideboard change. We keep seeing numbers change in the main deck as well. Like this one's running a Gix command. We haven't seen Gix command run in the main deck yet. Only running 3 enduring curiosities instead of 4. Had a Shieldred in the main. Unstoppable Slashers now back in the main. That hasn't been in the main. Flood Pit Strauner seems to have like kind of made its way into the deck and has like made itself a home essentially. Playing a lot less counter spells in this one. We're only playing 2 Phantom Interference as our counter spells, and then of course, we're still playing removal spells, no surprise there. But it is kind of different to see this deck continuously evolve and change, and it doesn't seem like anyone's come up with, even the correct 60 yet, let alone the correct 75, which I think the 75 will always be changing. I think your sideboard's always going to be meta dependent on, do we think there's going to be a lot more aggro showing up? Do we think there's going to be a lot more control showing up or mid-range, like mirror matches? So I think that's always going to be changing, but the 60 still hasn't even been figured out yet. So these Teamr mid-range decks continue to just kind of try to figure out what they want to play, what they're doing type situation. I don't think they know what the best 60 is. I don't think anyone knows what the best 60 is for this deck. So it is kind of surprising, or not surprising, but it's always interesting to see that these decks keep doing well despite I don't think anyone having the same even 60 in these challenges. So always kind of interesting. And then this was an interesting build I saw. It's a Mardu build, so it's red, black, and white. Red notably here just for Lightning Helix and for Angel of the Wrath as a way to do it for a kicker, but kind of an interesting take on the mid-range controlled style of it essentially. Playing 2 of the Bat Gods, 4 of the Mistmoor Overlord, the White Overlord, 4 Angel of Wrath, 3 Preachers, 4 Deep Cavern Bats, and then Warden Lordian of the third path, no surprise there. I do think enchantment removal in the main deck isn't a terrible thing to have right now, and then, just playing a bunch of removal spells in the sense of, we have Destroy Evil, Exercise, Go for the Throat, Duress to interact with our opponent, Lightning Helix to help us gain some life as well as another removal spell, and then 3 Virtue of Loyalty, which I think is also another good one there. So kind of an interesting take. This deck did only get like 17th place, so it didn't do amazingly well. It did top 32 though, technically. So kind of an interesting take on some of the mid-range strategies we've seen. I'm not sure if this is super good or super powerful at all, but it's interesting to see more things get explored, more things being done. I'm always interested to see what people are coming up with and what people are doing as a whole with standard as we keep evolving into the RCQ season. Moving on to the first challenge on Saturday. To no one's surprise, Teamr mid-range had 6 copies, the most copies of any deck, followed by Gruul Prowess, Golgari mid-range, both at 4, Domain at 3, kind of surprised to see Domain up that high, Mono Red with 3, Rakdos mid-range with 3, Orzhov mid-range with 2, that Rug combo deck running around with 2, and then a couple different one-ofs as well. So again, not too surprising, Teamr mid-range still dominating quotation marks with the number of copies in the top 32. Notably, it was only 6, so it wasn't something too crazy, like the last one we had 9. But it does seem that Teamr mid-range is probably one of the most popular decks to play right outside of Gruul Prowess and Mono Red, which you could almost lump those two together because of, they have essentially the same strategy, if you will. So it's still always going to be, you're always going to see a bunch of copies of them. Kind of surprised to see Domain up there that high. That deck's kind of fallen off. I do think Domain's kind of like in a bad position right now. Mainly because I just think that the aggro decks go underneath it really well, and then the tempo decks are able to still just out-tempo it. So it's like in this weird position where it can beat up on some of the mid-range decks, but even like Go Guardian mid-range, I think, does what Domain does better. So it's kind of interesting to see people are still playing Domain. I think Domain are kind of evolving or devolving into really just Overlord decks. So we'll see, how that all shakes out as a whole. But the Run combo deck, Teamr combo deck, whatever you want to call this deck, it was the one that took down this tournament. Not too much has changed in this deck. As a whole, it's still kind of the same deck that you've been seeing. A couple like different one-ofs and such like that. We have a Paul Pat's formation here in the main. That's a little different. Only two songs that makes the rats. Only two of those in the main deck. Only two up the beanstalks. We've seen different numbers of that. So just nothing too crazy with that. We had an up the beanstalks in the sideboard, which is kind of interesting. But nothing too crazy here. Nothing you're not really expecting essentially from this deck as it stands right now. So kind of interesting to see. I do think this deck struggles a lot with the aggro deck, so I think that's why we don't see this deck doing that well essentially. Yes, it can combo kill, a little bit faster or maybe on par with how fast the aggro decks are, but this deck does need a lot of things to go right for it to combo kill that early. And then the aggro decks just put on so much pressure. I mean, that's why we see the 4 Torch the Towers along with the 2 rooms to kind of help, hedge our bets against the aggro decks. But, sometimes aggro just overruns you and there's not much you can do about it. But it's an interesting deck. I like this deck a lot. I just don't think it's that well positioned, and I think moving forward it gets less well positioned with Foundations coming out here. We have the Burn deck that's definitely going to be popular coming up, and I think that this deck just gets worse against that because it doesn't have a way to answer burn at all. Like there's no life gain in this deck at all, so your creature removal will be better because it'll probably be less on creatures, but that's cool. They're still going to burn you out. So we'll see how well this deck does, coming post Foundations and all that fun jazz. Going on to the second challenge of Saturday, though, Gruul Prowess and Mono Red decided to show up on this one. Gruul Prowess had 6 copies, Mono Red had 5 copies, and then the Mirror Midrange only had 5 copies. This is the first time we've really seen the Mirror Midrange not be the most played deck in the challenge. Kind of fun to see. Gagari Midrange had 4, Teamr Combo had 2, Dory's Tempo had 2, Caretaker's Control had 2, Barzov Midrange had 2, and Domain had 3 copies altogether, and then 2 one-ofs. So, Caretaker's Talent coming back again. Kind of cool to see that deck still popping up, doing some numbers. Really surprising, though, that Teamr did not see the most play. We had, Gruul and Mono Red. Basically, the aggro taking up majority of the meta share here in this standard challenge. That being said, though, Caretaker's Talent did end up taking down the challenge. So this is a relatively stock list. There's not too much interesting or too many things changing in this list by any means. The biggest change to this deck is that we're seeing Overlord of the Mistmoors seeing play now. I'm not really sure why this deck didn't pick that up before. It just seems like a good card to have. That being said, I think the biggest challenge with this deck is the fact that it just doesn't close out games fast enough. And I think that's the biggest problem we'll see with this deck is that it doesn't close out games. I also think this is some super wild things going on here. I think this deck will probably be better if it had a different color. I think that if you cut down Leyline Arms, you cut down Enduring Innocence, you change some of the removal around, you just kind of make it to where Caretaker's Challenge is more of a value card than an all-in card. I think your deck becomes a lot better as a whole. But that's just kind of my 2 cents on this. That being said, I really like the Caretaker's Talent card. I think it's a very interesting card. I think it's a very good value card. I just think it needs to find a better shell than this mono white that we're seeing as a whole. But time will tell. This deck does get a bunch of minor upgrades, I think, going through Foundations. We get, Regal Carousel, the 5-mana cat that makes 2 cat tokens. Is also a lord for them. It gets some other notable sideboard cards, things like that. So we'll see what happens with this deck, if it stays where it is, if it gets better, gets worse, or whatnot. I do think that this deck could do a lot better if it just decided not to be mono white, essentially. But we'll see what happens. Like I said, this is a pretty stock version of the deck. The biggest difference is the Overlord, and the Virtue of Loyalty is starting to see play now as well, which I think is another good thing, where it kind of Pumps up your creatures, it puts you down, it makes you a faster clock. I think that's the biggest problem with this deck, is it gives you a lot of infinite time. It gives your opponents a lot of infinite time. So we'll see what happens with this deck as a whole, and if they figure out how to like kind of turn that corner, make it a little bit faster, make it a little bit more aggressive. If maybe adding another color is better, and I think if you add another color, you want to be like either red or white, essentially, to so that way you can not red, right, red or black, Jesus, red or black, so that way you can either be a little bit more aggressive, have a little bit better removal spells when it comes to the black portion of it, or if you want to go red, you have more like kind of burn to the face, kind of make it more of a like tempo style deck where we have, you know, the burn, we have a little bit like not better creatures as a whole, we have the artifact is escaping me that lets us poop out a token and return and getting bigger. Kind of just like something that can help us turn the corner a little bit faster. I think that's what this deck is really missing, is just that way to turn the corner. But we'll see what happens with this with Foundations. That being said, we do have our Sunday challenge, and once again, Teamr Midrange is back on top with 9 copies in the top 32. Gruul Prowls with 6, Golgari with 3, Domain with 3, again, surprising that deck's popping up again. Rug Combo with 2, Azorius Tempo with 2, that's the Azorius Oculus deck. The deck that, you know, essentially you're buying back your creatures with Helping Hand, things like that. Jeskai Convoke, and then a bunch of different little one-ups. So, once again, not too surprising. Teamr Midrange still putting up the most copies in a challenge, and then aggro right behind it. Nothing we haven't seen before. It's kind of the same song and tell we've seen. And then Mono Red actually took this one down. Pretty stocked list as a whole. Oh, sorry, green red. Sorry, that's his Gruul. I definitely said Mono Red as I looked right at Snakeskin Veil and Bushwhack. Excuse me. So, Gruul, green red, took it down. They have kind of switched over and started doing what the Mono Red strategies have been doing with the Lightning Strikes, the Shocks, and the main. And kind of just cutting down on the green portion. Like, as you can see, we're only playing 6 green cards in the main deck. You know, 2 Snakeskin Veils, 2 Bushwhacks, and 2 Questing Druid. Questing Druid probably be the best one of those cards, along with the Snakeskin Veil. Bushwhack, I'm not too sold on. I get that it lets you fight the other creatures, lets you target. I think that it's good for Screaming Nemesis as well. You know, being able to trigger that ability with Screaming Nemesis, so they can't gain life against somebody who's probably gaining a much life or things like that. So that's kind of cool. Nothing too crazy about this though. They're down on the Rockface Village to 2 copies. They're playing 1 Restless Ridgeline, the Manland, so that's kind of cool. But other than that, nothing too crazy about this list. Innkeeper's Talent has been moved to the sideboard. Outside of that, there's not too much to really speak about. It's just your standard kind of, you know, Gruul aggro, I'm going to beat your face in type situation. It'll be interesting to see if this is still the best, or like if this or Mono Red is still one of the best aggro versions to take, or if like the Burrows Burn deck, oh my goodness, is going to take over kind of the aggro situation after Foundations comes out. I definitely expect to see that deck when we go to SCG Columbus coming up here in just a weekend. I think that the Boros Burn deck is going to have a breakout weekend there, where it's going to be either like very much played, whether or not it's going to be like, you know, 8 copies in the top 8 type situation. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think it's going to be a very heavily played deck moving forward. It's super cheap as a whole. A lot of people have all the like expensive cards already for that deck. So I definitely see that deck like kind of popping up and doing well. It's just a matter of how well that deck does, I think, moving forward, and how well it actually is versus the more creature heavy versions of the burn decks or of the aggro decks and things of that nature. So it'll be interesting to see what Foundations does and how it shakes up the format as a whole. That being said, if we kind of break down the entire metagame here of this weekend, we had 29 Teamr Midrange throughout the the top 32 challenges. So kind of crazy. That's a lot of Teamr Midrange. Teamr Midrange is definitely one of the most played decks. I don't think anyone's surprised by this number. No one's like, oh my god, what? You know, no one's surprised by this by any means. But it is a little different that like Teamr Midrange just seems to continuously be on top. No one's really usurped it or found out a better way to play. So that is something you definitely want to figure out what you're doing against, essentially moving forward. Especially with the fact that it just has a lot of cheap creatures, a lot of cheap interaction. Like, you got to figure out a way to either stay on par with them, go super over top of them. Something you gotta do. You gotta figure out how you're beating Teamr mid range, and I think it's a challenge moving forward. Obviously, you know, Gruul prowess, mono red at 21 and 15 respectively. They do well against Teamr mid range decks. They overtax the removal, right? They're playing so many things. They're doing so many things. They're putting them on the back foot, and that's what you kind of need to do against Teamr mid range. Is put them on the back foot for they can't just sit there and gain card advantage the entire time. Guarding mid-range with 14 copies. I really like this mid-range deck. I think it's really fun. That being said, I do think that Teamr mid-range is probably the better version of this deck. I think that when you're in the super long, grindy games, like if you're going up against a lot of domain lists, you're going up a lot of the other like just random mid-range decks, Guarding mid-range feels better in that sense because you can play you get to go bigger than them in the mid-range strategy. The mid-range gets to go underneath Guardian mid-range, which is a lot better in my opinion. You're able to go under them, you get to punish them for, like, you know, they missed the land drop, they didn't have the removal spell at the right time type situation. I think that's where Guardian mid-range Teamr mid-range shines. And I think that's why you're seeing Teamr mid-range be so popular. It's the same concept of it punishes the decks when they miss a land drop, they don't have the removal spell at the right time, they don't have the interaction they need at the right time, and just punishes them. Domain had 10 copies, which I said, again, I'm kind of surprised the Domain has been making a comeback. I don't think that deck's really well positioned. Obviously, I could be wrong. You know, let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think Domain is still a really good deck to take to your RCQs, your challenges, things like that, or do you think it is a little cooked? Rug Combo putting up 6 copies in these challenges. Again, a little surprised to see Rug Combo kind of keep coming back. I think that deck is a little worse for wear against the aggro deck, so only time will tell. Orzhov midrange still putting up numbers. That deck keeps changing. I know I've seen a couple different copies of it, or a couple different lists of it going on. Be interesting to see if someone actually figures out how to break that style and make it, you know, stick. Azorius Temple putting up 6. Caretaker's Control putting up 5. Kind of surprised by that, with there being 5 copies of that deck, because it kind of has fallen off the face of the earth. Jeskai Convoke putting up only 4 copies. This deck, I think, is still really well positioned. The problem is it's just a dog to the aggro decks essentially running around, where Gruul Prowess Mono Red just, you know, gives your creature trample, and it just makes it impossible for you to trade effectively without losing your entire board for their one creature. You're just getting, you know, constantly 3-for-1 over there. I think that's the biggest problem why we don't see Jeskai Convoke doing better, because I think Jeskai Convoke is super good against like the mid-range and the mid-range decks. It just gets to go super wide, and they can't answer all of it all that fast. But when you go, you know, round 1, round 2 into Gruul Prowess Mono Red, and you're like, cool, I'm 0-2 starting. I'm never going to see these mid-range decks I'm trying to just prey on. So that is, I think, the biggest problem with Convoke right now. Rakdos midrange put up 3. Teamr Demons had 2 copies. Azorius Enchantment had 2 copies, and a bunch of little one-ofs. So I think we can successfully say that, you know, the metagame's not solved, but, you know, Teamr midrange and the Gruul Prowess and Mono Red are the two, I'm going to call it 2 biggest decks, 3 biggest decks you can expect to run into. You need to have a game plan against these decks if you're going to any challenges, any RCQs, anything like that. If you're going to, you know, SG Columbus, the Columbus Con here next weekend, if you're going to be going to the Atlanta new GP style event, I can't remember what it's called, here in January, like, you need to have a game plan for these type decks for sure. Teamr midrange, I don't see getting worse after Foundations. I don't see it getting super better. Like, there's not, like, there's really, like, there's good sideboard cards and stuff in it, but I don't think there's nothing in Foundations that screamed, I'm putting this into Teamr midrange, this is 4 copies, it's going to be amazing type card. Same thing with the Gruul Prowess and Mono Red. These decks don't get worse going into Foundations. There's some more sideboard cards which will be helpful against them, but we also have the Burrows Burn deck that's going to be coming out. I think it's going to, you know, maybe not usurp one of these two, but it's definitely going to be putting the numbers right up there with Gruul Prowess Mono Red, depending on how well the burn strategy works out in Standard. But yeah, so I think just moving forward, you need to have a game plan against Teamr midrange. You need to have a game plan against the Gruul and Mono Red decks. And you just gotta figure out what you want to do in this format and what you're doing and why is it better than what these strategies are doing moving forward. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of like takes over as a whole. I do think that Caretaker's talent has a spot in this Standard meta. I think that the deck's not being built correctly as a mono white deck, so we'll see what happens with that. I would like to see what happens with Ors on mid range. It seems like there's people still trying to work on it, trying to make it better. I'm curious to see what people come up with those numbers as well, and I can't wait to see what Foundations is going to take or bring to the format, essentially, like what people figure out, what people are doing with it. There's a lot of like little combos in that set, so it'll be interesting to see what kind of new archetypes come from that and what we see as a whole from that. But let me know what you guys think is going to be, the breakout deck this coming weekend here at SCG Columbus Con, as well as what you guys are playing in your RCQs, what you're planning to play in your RCQs. I'd love to hear from you guys. But as always, if you like what you're seeing, like what I'm doing, go ahead and leave a like on the video, subscribe to my channel, and I'll catch you guys next time.